is the story of a lost neighborhood and of its people who did not want to go.
I don't want no money. I want my home. The old man is old. See how the old man is old? No more. That's enough. I don't want to get out. I said to my two daughters, they don't want to get out too because they spend a lot of money. Plenty of money they spend in this place. You're not getting out to nobody. Never.
Hi, welcome to the West End Video Newsletter. I think tonight we're going to report on eminent domain and urban renewal. Now, a lot of people think it's no longer a problem, and I thought that HUD had cracked down on HUD and on urban renewal and eminent domain, but I guess they haven't across the country. I was invited to speak and to attend a meeting down in Washington, D.C. last weekend, and I went down there, and what they were doing is they're forming a coalition called the Castle Coalition. They call it the Castle Coalition because they figure every man's home is their castle, and nobody has a right to take your home to give to another private party. Nobody disputes the right for eminent domain to be used for a public purpose, but when they take it for somebody else's home, it's a whole other thing. I went down there. It was very interesting. Everybody around here knows the West End story. Now, one of the things that amazed me was that when I went down there, around here, about a year ago, I went to a seminar, and Jane Goody got up and said the reason why development in Boston is so bad and so hard to get through is because the West End project was such a horrendous project that they made everybody go through the hoops and through the gates and through everything and do it in such a way that development really became almost a hassle to get through. Now, I don't know if I believed that or not at the time. I said, well, yeah, that could be, but I think probably HUD cracked down on a lot of their practices of the 50s, and, you know, the country is now different. But it's not. I went down there and I heard some of the most outlandish horror stories about eminent domain and urban renewal, and I couldn't believe it. And I came back and I was amazed. And see, we don't have it around here in Boston, okay? Because here the West End became a cause célèbre, and that what happened was that it was such a horrendous show, a horrendous project, that even the federal government uses it as an example of how not to conduct urban renewal. I mean, it was bad. Although it still happens in Boston. Matter of fact, there's what they call 10 abuses, the 10 worst abuses of eminent domain urban renewal, and they have a case listed here in Boston. And what happened here in Boston is they took a place by eminent domain, but I guess the Angelo sub shop had a lease that ran until 2012. Instead of trying to buy them out, and whoever they were going to give it, they were going to make a hotel out of it. They still are going to make a hotel out of it. The BRA is taking the place by eminent domain, and that way they'll break the lease, and then they'll just give the property free and clear to the new owners, the private owners. In other words, what they're doing is taking the building by eminent domain and giving it to private owners, to developers, a hotel. And I guess the Angelos is going to lose about 10 years of their lease. Now, it's basically taking their rights to that lease and just washing them down the toilet bowl, whereas they would have the ability, if they were, if somebody wanted to buy that building and they didn't take it by eminent domain, they would have had to buy their lease out, and they would have had some money, and they would have been able to do it. That's the American way. But even here in Boston, I mean, they wouldn't try this on a large scale in a neighborhood anymore, but they're still doing it to people in their own little ways. The BRA, I guess, hasn't changed its spots. And one thing I want to say about redevelopment authorities, you have to remember, if you have a redevelopment authority, they're going to redevelop. The problem with redevelopment authorities is like a butcher shop not selling meat. If you have a redevelopment authority, people are going to go out and redevelop. They're going to look around. That's their job. They don't sit around and get paid for nothing. They go out and redevelop. And one of the biggest tools is eminent domain. So a lot of people will get hurt. And it's all across the country. It's amazing. I thought it stopped, but it didn't. And they have flagrant abuses. I was with some man down in, he was from New Jersey. He had a garage, and they were taking his garage by eminent domain, and they were giving it to the cousin of, after they took it, they're going to give it to the cousin of a city councilor. And it's amazing that, nobody even cares about it. People in New London, matter of fact, there was a show on Chronicle about, and I was talking to people, I sat next to them, that they took 4 of their houses by eminent domain, and they were on the Thames River, and they offered them $200,000, I mean, for 4 houses. Oh, and part of the reason is when you do eminent domain, what happens is if you take a place and you say that it's blighted, if you admit that it's blighted, then you don't get as much money because it's blighted. Now, most of the times, blighted is, it's a wink and a nod type thing. Most of the properties aren't blighted, but they use that because otherwise they have to have blighted properties so when they go into court say that the properties are blighted. The whole thing is, it's unbelievable. I really, it hit me right to my core because I really thought that a lot of this stuff had gone by the boards. Now, in Massachusetts, a lot of it has. And that's because West Enders suffered through one of the worst cases of eminent domain and urban renewal in history. Now, in Massachusetts, you don't get a lot of that. But across the country, they're using it. They're going in with bulldozers and giving it to private companies. Nobody has a right to take your property and give it to somebody for private property. I mean, they have the right because they're doing it. But they shouldn't be, and people should be fighting it, and people should be saying, that can't happen, not in America. It's your right, it's your castle. You have the ability to, to live in your place as long as you were able to afford, to pay your mortgage and your taxes. Nobody should be able to have to come in and just take your property. Anyways, this group, it's called the Castle Coalition. They were formed by a group called the Institute for Justice. All these people, there must have been 50 people at this conference, and this Institute for Justice helped them all. And I have never seen more people, they praised them. Oh, if it wasn't for them, my property would be gone. And they put their money where their mouth is. They go out and they get people into the streets, they tell them how to use publicity, and they also use their lawyers. And they're winning a lot of the cases. And not only, a lot of them aren't even going to court anymore because they're going in and they've learned how to use, be active, activism in the streets and with the news media. A lot of people are realizing, especially if people come up in the news media and show that somebody is taking this to give to their cousin or, for a cohort, that's it's just really an abuse of power, and I can't say too much about it. And I guess, like I say, I've been doing the show now for 140 some odd shows, and the thing that strikes me at my core is because when I was younger, I was about 20 years old when they tore the West End down, it devastated me. And you can't realize how bad when somebody comes in, takes your property away from you, and makes you move when you're not ready to. Mark Freed did a study, and in it he said that it was the first time they realized that people could grieve for homes. And when they took the West End, a lot of the people, a study was done, and the people realized, not the people that were doing the study, they were asking the question, how do you feel? Sad, happy, other. And most of the people were putting down other. And what they found out when they went in and they rechecked the other, they found that 90% of everybody was suffering from some form of depression. Not clinical depression, where you couldn't, but, it was knocking you off your stride. And especially the older people. After they tore the West End down, whole hordes of older people died. All the support systems were gone. The whole thing changed. They were in a whole new environment. Most of them died. And younger people like me, up to about 21, most of us had, we were in this secure environment, and, none of us wanted to leave. when you're young, you feel secure where you are. All of a sudden, you're in the middle of nowhere. You're in a strange town. You don't have any friends. Your friends are all spread all over the world. It was a whole different thing. And I do think that anywhere there is eminent domain and urban renewal. I know I'm getting a little bit too deep into it, but I want to tell you that across the country, people should be cognizant that this is happening, and people should be fighting it. Now, these are the 10 biggest abuses. There's like the New London case. In Florida, they took a whole tract of land and because they said they wanted it for a school, then they gave it to somebody else, and it wasn't even a school. In Kansas, they took a BMW dealership and sold the property to another BMW for the same dealership for the same price they took the dealership from them. Like I say, Boston has that lease with D'Angelo's, and like I say, eminent domain is a insidious thing, and maybe I've probably made my point. I've probably gone over it, and but I feel strongly about it, as you can possibly tell, and I would like to say that. This Institute for Justice, if anybody out there hears of any type of, eminent domain, if you have eminent domain cases or you hear of anything, why don't you let me know? I'd like to know if there's anybody out there and anything, suffering through any type of eminent domain, urban renewal. I'd be interested in knowing. And my number is 617-628-2479. And I also have a website that's will be on the screen. So if you let me know, I'd be willing to help, and I'm sure that the Castle Coalition would be willing to help too, because they are really, really into this. And I am, for once in my life, I'm glad to see something like this, because I always thought that the government, see, it's a public-private partnership, and it's almost impossible to fight big money and big government. Almost impossible. It's tough. They didn't. The West End was almost impossible. It was impossible. We lost anyway. But I guess that's about all I'm going to say on my trip to Washington, D.C. On the other hand, tonight I figured to fit into it. Every year I go to MIT and I do a class on the West End. Dennis Frenchman teaches urban planning to master's students, and every year I go there. I show Lost Neighborhood. Now, we've showed Lost Neighborhood. It's a half-hour documentary done in 1962 by ABC. And we show it on this show like every 15 or 20 shows. We go back and do it because it's really interesting. I show that, and then I give a rundown of what happened in the West End, things like Quick Take, which Quick Take is still happening today. Quick Take is they give you $1 for your house, and somewhere down the line they pay you for it. And if you can't afford to move and buy a new house, you have to pay rent to the city, which is, it's just crazy. I tell them about things like Quick Take, what the West End was like, how they went around to taking the West End, no street cleaners. They sent out, or in the early 50s, they sent out word that they were thinking about taking the West End, and they advised people not to fix up the outsides of their houses. Then all of a sudden, garbage disposal, pickup became spasmodic, and then you had people, the street cleaning. You never seen a street cleaner anymore, and the place started to look like it was a slum. Now, when they take your house, if it's a slum, for about a third of what it normally would cost in a viable neighborhood. So it has it's a two-pronged attack. Okay. One, by making the circumstances terrible, they try to get you out, and number two, when they do get you out, they get you out for a lot less money than they think you deserve. We were on a panel once with it was ENDRA, Environmental Design Research or something. I forgot the exact name, but they were at the gun building at Harvard, and we were on a panel with 4 other guys, and Chester Hartman was one of them. And what Chester said was the city was extremely proud that they took the West End in a third of the time that they thought it was going to take, and at a third of the price they thought it was going to cost them. It's amazing, because that means that West Enders got 2/3 less than they should have gotten, and they were out 2/3 faster than they should have gone. Okay, so I guess that's about it. And I would like to show, we're going to show this this class that I do. It basically it'll be me answering questions with urban planning students, master's urban planning students, and they're pretty intelligent people, and they ask some very good questions. So they realized when they couldn't get people to build in the South End, they went looking for a new location, because there was $11 million out there for slum removal. They went over to the West End and they found location. And that's basically what happened. They tore the West End down, they went around, street cleaning became spasmodic, garbage pickup became spasmodic. After a while, the place started looking like a slum, and they kept saying that the West End was a slum, and they came in and they took it. Nobody wanted to leave, but they took it anyway. There was a fight. There wasn't, the papers didn't pick it up all that much. There was $32,000 worth of damage done to a crane at one point, and they said it was, instead of saying that the neighborhood was uprising, like they probably would today, they said it was rival construction crews who went after it. But that's basically what happened. That's just a little intro to this video. This video was done in 1962 by ABC, and ABC did this documentary. It's called Lost Neighborhood, and it pretty much, they tried at that time to get both sides of the story in this video. And with that, I'll sit back. No.
People just don't like to be told by an emissary of the city, the state, or the federal government. They just don't like to be told. They regard it as something out of a page of Adolf Hitler. That a person representing our government at any level can walk right in, and simply because they say that the home or the property is flooded, move them out and tear the property down.
To Vanda Sakovic, a home is more than just a living place. 12,000 of her former neighbors feel the same, and millions of Americans are learning the same feelings. For in these 1960s, we're dedicated to renewing our cities, tearing down the old to replace it with the modern. Many times it is a case of the common good versus the desires of the individual. But once torn, the old neighborhood can never be replaced. That is the subject of this program, the lost neighborhood. The city of Boston is proud of its landmarks. Boston shows devout reverence for historic shrines. Once there was a neighborhood in the shadows of Faneuil Hall. It was called the West End. Admittedly, it was not a place of beauty, but it was the chosen home of 12,000 Bostonians who within it found love and warmth, shelter and contentment. And what else is home? But it is today's thinking that the old and decaying parts of a city, and Boston has some, must be replaced. You must keep pace with the glitter of new cities. The process by which this is done is called urban renewal. Now, urban renewal is a city planner's phrase. Reduced to its simplest terms, it has most often meant knocking down the old and erecting the modern and imposing, which will attract new businesses, new money, and new people. This happened to the West End. The old has been knocked down. The West Enders are gone. Luxury apartments for 450 families now stand where once there were row upon row of well-worn, well-filled brick houses for 12,000. Other buildings are slow in rising.
Supposedly everybody should be glad to leave, but our research team, consisting of psychiatrists, social psychologists, and social scientists, soon discovered that for many of the families there, to live in the West End meant a privilege rather than a bad necessity. They had a beautiful recreation area right next door along the Charles River. They had a way of life in their streets of a lot of communication from family to family, across the street, from window to window. A great many ways have been developed of companionship and mutual help in an informal way within large families and from family to family, which allowed them to put up with the bad housing with just the same, a sense of relative comfort. And many of the homes, looking perhaps ugly from the outside, were well appointed inside and had many attractive features arranged by the families in their efforts to create a comfortable life.
Outsiders always find it easier to make realistic appraisals of human problems. Losing one's home is a human problem. And when you talk to the West Enders, you hear the talk of the heart rather than realistic appraisals, which is only to be expected, for even in the 20th century, human beings are largely governed by their hearts. This is Wanda Zakovich.
Telling about the uprooting of the 12,000 men, women, and children in the West End isn't an easy thing to do in just a matter of minutes, because there's just too much agony, too much heartbreak and chaos. I would call the West End a typical American community. The American neighborhood as we knew it in former times, before the era of Renewal. We were a mixture of many nationalities, many races, colors of skin. We were teachers and artists, we were waitresses and plumbers, we were retired bankers, all sorts of people.
This is the North End, the old North Church towers above the card players. If the bricks are different, the air is the same as the old West Ends. Home is more than just a place where you eat and sleep.
And you had your little grocery stores, a person that could go in and talk to her grocer, her meat market man. She could speak to him in Russian, and Jewish, and Polish, and French. She could buy her own special kind of bread, her own cheeses, the different brands of coffee and the grind that she liked. It was just a mixture of everything and anything, and yet the most fantastic thing was we all got along and loved each other. We really did. Some people were born in the area, some had moved in as youngsters with their family, and very few people moved out of the area. It was a wonderful place to bring up children, for instance. We had the Child's Road boating program, we had swimming pools, we had the little baseball leagues that the young fellows played in, and at night their fathers had their softball teams down there. They went down to after dinner. And then too, it had the old European idea of a child was brought up with a bit of discipline. He was taught to love his God and his country. He was taught that things were wrong or right. And the child wasn't confused, I think, under those ideas.
The word slum is a loaded word. It tells you how the user of the word feels. It doesn't tell you anything about the thing which he is talking about. So that if I use the word slum with reference to a particular section of a city, this simply says in some way that I disapprove of, that I don't like, that I devalue that area. When the redevelopment authority, the newspapers, the rest of society says to them, you are living in a slum, This is a blighted area. This is something which can be destroyed and which is expendable. It hits the person in the very core of his being, because this means I am no good. I am expendable. I can be shoved around by society.
We don't care. Let them say what they want. We were happy here. People kept coming in, like I said, from different states and said to us, well, how could you live here? You know, this is slum. These are our homes, and we're happy here.
The question is, whose happiness is most important? The rest of Boston who will glow with civic pride in the shiny and renewed area, or the affected men and women who have been uprooted? If the fate of the West End was for the greater common good, the sacrifice was not accepted by its dispossessed. Resentful or not, they had to move.
The great error, the great mistake, was that at the time that the West End development was going up, there was not also going up in other areas of the city long 2- and 3-family, low-rent duplex houses, 2- or 3-family houses, or garden-type apartments that could reasonably accommodate the people dislocated at rents that they could afford. There was nothing else wrong, in my opinion, with the West End development, other than, I would add, this one point. In this whole picture of urban renewal, you can't forget people.
What would have happened to the West End is probably the North End and the South End times 10. Because the West End, out of all the neighborhoods, had some really great housing. 6-room apartments. They didn't have that. They don't have it on the North Slope of Beacon Hills. So some of them do. But the West End was a much better, there was much better housing stock in the West End. But unfortunately, you were right on the river, you were on the foot of Beacon Hill, right with the State House. Beacon Hill was right there. It was just a great location.
But they threw a party and nobody came. So they cleared the site and nobody wanted to invest in it.
No,
they didn't even have an investor for the site before they cleared it. Can you imagine? Okay, we will talk more about this program later, so they were.
But I have that option, okay? I'm not planning to, but I have that option. But if they came in and somebody gave me $1 for my house and said it was worth $200,000, right? And they would pay me in 5 years, it's a whole different. It's a whole different thing. Okay, that was the MIT class that I do every year, and that's there. Dennis Frenchman's. He's a professor. He gives this class every year. I mean, he teaches through the whole year, but I do this particular class every year, and it's the master's students in urban planning, and they're very intelligent, and they go out in. Well, what I tell them is, remember, in your planning, whatever you have to do, you have to respect people's rights, okay? When you're taking into consideration whatever you're planning, people's rights are paramount. And I think they're listening, and if I keep this up, maybe in the future I'll have enough, I'll have talked to enough people that urban planning will sometimes become more humane than it is now. And I guess that's it, and I'll see you at the next West End video newsletter.